Have you ever been alone at home and felt like someone was watching you? This happened to my friend, Max, one weekend when he had the house to himself. Max is not the type to get easily spooked, but what happened that night changed everything. It was a chilly Friday evening, and Max's parents had gone on a weekend trip, leaving him alone in their suburban house. Max was excited about having the place to himself. He ordered a pizza, grabbed a few beers from the fridge, and settled down to watch a horror movie marathon. The irony, right? Watching horror movies alone in an empty house? Classic. As the night wore on, the wind picked up, howling through the trees outside. Max was halfway through his second movie when he heard a faint knocking sound. At first, he thought it was part of the movie, but the knocking persisted even during the quieter scenes. He paused the movie and listened closely. Max got up and walked to the front door. He peeked through the peephole but saw nothing. Thinking it was just some kids playing pranks, he shrugged it off and went back to his movie. Not 5 minutes later, the knocking returned, louder this time. Max's heart started to race. He decided to check the back door, just in case. He moved cautiously through the house, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. When he reached the kitchen, he noticed the back door was slightly ajar. Had he forgotten to lock it? He could have sworn he did. He quickly shut and locked the door, double-checking it this time. Returning to the living room, Max tried to calm his nerves. He picked up his phone and texted his best friend Jake about the strange knocking. Jake, ever the prankster, replied, "Maybe it's a ghost." Max chuckled, but the humor did little to ease his growing unease. The next hour passed without incident, and Max began to relax again. Just as he was about to start the third movie, the power went out. Perfect timing, right? The entire house plunged into darkness. Max cursed under his breath and fumbled for his phone. Using the flashlight app, he navigated his way to the basement to check the circuit breaker. The basement was the last place Max wanted to be. It was damp, musty, and filled with shadows that seemed to move in the dim light. As he reached the circuit breaker, he heard it again. The knocking. But this time, it was coming from inside the house. Max's blood ran cold. He flipped the switch, and the lights flickered back on. With the house illuminated once more, Max searched every room. There was no sign of anyone. He locked every door and window, checked the closets, under the beds, and even behind the shower curtain in the bathroom. Nothing. He was alone. Or was he? Max decided to call it a night and headed to his bedroom. He locked his door and sat on his bed, trying to shake off the paranoia. Just as he was about to turn off his bedside lamp, he heard a soft whisper. "Max." He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Max." Gathering his courage, Max grabbed the baseball bat he kept by his bed and swung the door open. The hallway was empty, but the whisper continued, echoing through the house. He followed the sound, leading him back to the living room. There, standing by the front door, was a figure. It was a woman, her face obscured by long, dark hair. She was soaked, as if she had been standing in the rain. Max's mind raced. Who was she? How did she get in? But before he could react, she spoke again. "Max, help me." His fear turned to confusion. "Who are you? What do you want?" he demanded. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked through the front door, disappearing into the night. Max rushed to the door and flung it open, but she was gone. The street was empty. The only sound was the wind rustling the leaves. Max didn't sleep at all that night. He sat in the living room, clutching the bat, waiting for the woman to return. But she never did. The next morning, he told his parents everything. They were skeptical, of course, but the fear in Max's eyes was real. To this day, Max doesn't know who the woman was or what she wanted, but every time he hears a knock at the door, he can't help but wonder if she's come back. You know those nights when everything seems too quiet? That's when your mind starts playing tricks on you. Or is it? My cousin Sarah had one such night that she'll never forget, and neither will I after hearing her recount it. Sarah lived in a quaint little house at the edge of town, surrounded by woods. It was the perfect place for someone who loved peace and solitude. One winter evening, her parents went out of town for the weekend, leaving her alone with her dog, Rocky. She relished the thought of a quiet weekend and settled in with a book and a cup of tea. Around 9 p.m., Sarah let Rocky out into the backyard. As she stood by the kitchen window, she noticed how dark and still the woods were. Rocky trotted back, and she locked the door, pulling the curtains shut. The wind outside picked up, making the trees sway and creak ominously. She decided to watch a movie and picked a thriller to match the mood. Halfway through, Rocky started barking furiously at the front door. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be at this hour? She muted the TV and listened intently. Rocky's barking grew more intense, a low, guttural growl accompanying it. Someone was out there. Grabbing her phone, she edged towards the door and peeked through the peephole. Nothing. Just the empty porch and the darkness beyond. She hushed Rocky and opened the door a crack, enough to see if anyone was hiding in the shadows. Still nothing. With a sigh of relief, she closed the door and double-checked the lock. "Must be a raccoon or something," she muttered to Rocky, who remained tense, ears perked up. She went back to her movie, trying to shake off the nerves, but the feeling of being watched lingered. About an hour later, as she was getting ready for bed, she heard a faint tapping sound. It was coming from the back of the house. Sarah froze, her mind racing. She turned off her bedroom light and crept towards the kitchen. The tapping continued, methodical and slow. She peeked through the curtains and saw a figure standing by the window. Her breath aught in her throat. It was a man, his face obscured by a hood, tapping on the glass with his fingers. Rocky growled softly, sensing her fear. The man lifted his head, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. He smiled, a slow, eerie grin that sent chills down her spine. Sarah's hands trembled as she dialed 911. She whispered her situation to the operator, who assured her that help was on the way. Meanwhile, the man continued tapping, Asif taunting her. She could hear the wind howling outside, but inside everything was eerily still. "Stay calm, Sarah," she told herself. "The police will be here soon." Minutes felt like hours. She clutched Rocky, trying to keep him quiet. Then, the tapping stopped. Silence. She peeked out the window again. The man was gone. Her heart pounded as she scanned the yard. No sign of him. Just as she thought it was over, she heard it again, this time from the front door. "Sarah," came a whisper from the other side. Her blood ran cold. How did he know her name? She backed away, her mind racing. Should she confront him? Hide? Run? The front doorknob jiggled. He was trying to get in. Sarah grabbed a kitchen knife and stood her ground. "Leave me alone!" she shouted, hoping her voice sounded braver than she felt. The doorknob stopped moving. There was a brief, unsettling silence before the whisper came again. "Sarah, let me in." Finally, the sound of sirens broke through the night. Red and blue lights flashed outside as the police car pulled up. The man at the door cursed and fled into the woods. Sarah ran to the door, and there with open relief washing over her as she saw the officers approaching. The police searched the area but found no trace of the man. They assured Sarah they would patrol the neighborhood throughout the night. One of the officers stayed with her until her parents returned the next morning. Sarah never found out who the man was or why he targeted her. The police speculated he was a drifter, but the fact that he knew her name still haunts her. She moved to a different house shortly after, but she never forgot that night. The night when the silence was broken by a whisper and her sense of safety was shattered forever. Living in an old Victorian house sounds like a dream, right? For Jenna, it was a mix of charm and eeriness, especially when she was home alone. The house, with its creaky floors and drafty rooms, always seemed to have a life of its own. One autumn evening, Jenna's parents went out for a late dinner, leaving her to watch over her little brother, Timmy. Jenna put Timmy to bed around 8 p.m., and with the house now quiet, she decided to catch up on some reading in the living room. The wind outside rustled the fallen leaves, creating a soothing background noise. Halfway through her book, she heard a faint thumping sound from above. She paused, listening carefully. It seemed to come from the attic. Jenna shrugged it off, thinking it might be a squirrel or a bird that had gotten inside. After all, old houses like their Soffin had little critters finding their way in. But the thumping persisted, growing louder and more rhythmic. It wasn't just an animal. Jenna's curiosity got the better of her. She grabbed a flashlight and headed upstairs, tiptoeing past Timmy's room so as not to wake him. The attic door was at the end of the hallway, a small, rickety thing that creaked with every touch. Jenna hesitated for a moment. The no penned the door and climbed the narrow staircase. The air grew cold as she ascended, and the smell of dust and old wood filled her nostrils. She reached the top and shone her flashlight around. Boxes of old clothes, forgotten toys, and antique furniture cluttered the space. The beam of light revealed nothing unusual. She was about to turn back when the thumping resumed, this time directly above her head. Jenna's ear traced. The roof? How could something be on the roof? She stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of it. Then she noticed something. A small door she had never seen before, tucked away behind an old dresser. The thumping seemed to be coming from behind it. Gathering her courage, Jenna moved the dresser aside and approached the door. It was smaller than a regular door, almost like a crawl space entrance. She reached for the handle, her hand trembling. As she pulled it open, the thumping stopped abruptly. She peered inside, her flashlight revealing a narrow passage that seemed to lead nowhere. The air was even colder here, and Jenna felt a shive run down her spine. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence, a soft, almost whispering voice. "Help me!" Jenna jumped back, nearly dropping the flashlight. The voice had come from the crawl space. She strained her ears, trying to hear it again. "Please, help me," it repeated, more desperate this time. "Who's there?" Jenna called out, her voice shaking. There was no reply, just an eerie silence. She wanted to run, to get out of the attic and forget this ever happened, but something compelled her to stay. She crawled into the passage, her flashlight flickering as she moved forward. The passage was narrow and cramped, making it difficult to move. Jenna's heart pounded in her chest, every sound amplified in the tight space. She crawled further until she reached the end, where the passage opened into a small hidden room. Inside, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A child's bed, old and worn, sat in the corner of the room. Toys and books were scattered around, covered in dust. But what caught her attention was a diary lying open on the bed. She picked it up and flipped through the pages, reading the scribbled entries. They were from a little girl named Emily, who had lived in the house many years ago. The last entry sent chills down Jenna's spine. "They've locked me in here again. I don't think they're coming back. Please, someone help me." As she read, the voice came again, now directly behind her. "Help me!" Jenna spun round, but there was noon there. The room felt colder, darker. She backed out of the passage as quickly as she could and ran down the attic stairs, slamming the door behind her. Breathing heavily, she sat at the top of the stairs, trying to process what had just happened. Was it a ghost? A memory? She didn't know, but she felt an overwhelming sadness for the girl who had been trapped there. Jenna decided to tell her parents everything when they got home. That night, she stayed in Timmy's room, not wanting to be alone. When her parents returned, she recounted the events, showing them the diary as proof. They were skeptical but agreed to investigate further. The next day, they found records of the family who had lived there, including a girl named Emily who had gone missing decades ago. The discovery left them all shaken. Jenna never heard the voice again, but the attic remained a place of mystery and sorrow, a reminder of the echo soft he passed that sometimes refused to stay silent. If you want to see more horror stories, check out my next video.